So for better or worse, I get these brainstorms, particularly while I'm doing my delivery route and when I'm done. And it always ends up being like 3 or 4 o'clock in the morning when I record this stuff. And so that's why the lighting is terrible. And I alternate putting the camera on its side or not, but I know those black bars are really annoying when you're watching anything on YouTube or the computer, so we'll try putting it on its side and see if I can get my eye line right for the camera. Anyway, Darci's Corner. My wife and I were having a discussion earlier today about cancel culture and why we should like certain things or not like certain things. And the Confederate flag was brought up. We're Canadians, by the way, so like we don't really care that much. Well, I don't care that much about the American flag one way or the other, but still, that subject came up today. And I was trying to help her understand how for some people, many people, sadly, the Confederate flag is very similar to the Nazi flag. Like, it represents the same thing. It represents slavery and persecution based on race or color or something. And I know that many people who love that flag don't think that way. And you're right, and it's great, and that's fine. But a lot of people do. So I'm perfectly okay with having that flag removed from my environment. And I was trying to explain this to her in a way that kind of made sense. And I don't know how close I came to her actually understanding what I was saying. Because she's like, yes, but to me it doesn't mean that, and so it's not really a bad thing. And I said, well, like, I understand, right? Because I grew up in the 80s, or I was a kid in the 80s, and many of us were, and the General Ler was a central figure to us, right? Because back in the 80s, lots of times popular TV shows with the superheroes or whatever, or the people who you're rooting for, there was always a car associated with them, right? Now, the Dukes of Hazzard had the General Ler, Michael Knight had that kick-ass car he had, and then the A-Team had their van, right? And those were like characters in the show, more so with Knight Rider. But also the General Ler, like, that was, they took the hero of the show was always that car, which was the Confederate flag. The Confederate flag was the hero. You know, they made other shows back then with similar symbols, like Hogan's Heroes had Nazi flags in it, but the Nazis were never the heroes, were they? They were always made to look like idiots or buffoons. But in the General Ler, or in the Dukes of Hazzard, the General Ler was the hero, right? So they took that flag and they made it the hero, whereas in the other show, they took that flag and they made that the bumbling fool. Well, that's the problem, right? Like, if you were to remake the Dukes of Hazzard and instead of the Confederate flag, it was a Nazi flag on the car and on the door, and like, they're the good old boys and they're flying a Nazi flag, like, that would be a different show, wouldn't it? You could have the exact same lines and characters and whatever, and that show would have a different meaning. Suddenly it would make the Nazis the good guys, right? The Confederates, not that they were all evil people, but some of them were. They were advocating for property rights, and by property they meant people. That's horrible, right? So that's why we don't promote the Confederate flag, because it was the symbol for property rights, and those property rights were, you know, people of color, which is a horrible thing. Anyway, just been thinking about 80s shows and wanted to share that even though I love the Dukes of Hazzard, and when I watched that show as a kid, and even when I watched it later as an adult, because we had Deja Vu and reruns and stuff, and I still like the show as an adult. Like, it's still I can still watch the show and enjoy it. But I never once considered it that it was promoting racism because I didn't think of that flag as being racist. Now that I do think about that flag as being racist, it's kind of hard to enjoy the show. It's like, oh, they made the white supremacy symbol the good guy. I don't feel good about watching that now. Even though I liked the morals of the show and I thought it was funny, and more or less it was a very entertaining show. I just don't agree with white supremacy. And neither do the guys that made it. Like, you'll see John Snyder giving all sorts of talks on YouTube about, like, that's not what the show was about. And it wasn't. Right? The show was not about racism. There was a lot of sexism in it. Holy crap. And drinking and driving. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of bad habits that were promoted in that show. But racism wasn't one of them. Nonetheless, if the central character of the show is a symbol for white supremacy, it's like, well, I can just watch a different show. It's okay. I still enjoyed my childhood, but I can watch different shows and I'll be fine. Anyway, that's my thought on that. This is Darcy's Corner. Talk to y'all later.